Okay, guys, so today we're going to be going over the next section in history, the social impacts of the Industrial Revolution. All right, we're going to be using this textbook section. The first question is, how did the Industrial Revolution affect entrepreneurs who helped set it in motion? Well, we don't know what an entrepreneur is yet, but we're gonna. Okay, from the reading, how did it affect the entrepreneurs? It says right here, the Industrial Revolution brought great riches to most of the entrepreneurs who helped set it in motion. It's the first line of the section. So we're going to go ahead and put that in here. Made them rich. Okay, it made them rich. How did it affect the workers of the Industrial Revolution? Let's take a look. For the millions of workers who crowded into the new factories, however, the industrial age brought poverty and harsh living conditions. So I think it's safe to say that the Industrial Revolution was good for some people, and at least initially, it was bad for others. Okay, the working people, what we'll come to learn called the proletariat, that group of people, they suffered early in the Industrial Revolution, and some would say that they continue to suffer because of the Industrial Revolution. The next question is, what is urbanization? So we're going to go into the text and we're going to find that. What is urbanization and why did it happen? It says the Industrial Revolution brought rapid urbanization, or the movement of people to cities. Changes in farming, soaring population growth, and an increasing demand for workers led masses of people to migrate from farms to cities. Almost overnight, small towns around coal mines or iron mines mushroomed into cities. Other cities grew up around the factories that entrepreneurs built in the once quiet market towns. So why did urbanization happen? Well, changes in farming, population growth, and a demand for workers. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, suddenly things just look a lot different. Okay. Things look a lot different. People aren't needed on the farms as much because of enclosure. Enclosure causes it, well, enclosure among other things, increasing technology. It means that fewer people are needed to make more food, so population grows. And as population grows and machines are made in cities, now they need workers to work on the machines. I'll keep this up for a few seconds, Nevada, but I am making a recording of this. I'm not going to make the recording super duper long. You can always just go back to it. And again, this is reading homework that we were doing last night. We were finishing this yesterday. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. The next question asks us, so it comes from the section called New Social Classes Emerge. And the next question asks us, what did the people in the middle class own? What was owned by the people in the middle class? So new social classes emerge. The Industrial Revolution created a new middle class along with the working class. Those in the middle class owned and operated the new factories, mines, and railroads, among other industries. Their lifestyle was much more comfortable than those of the working class. So I know that coming up through high school, I got the idea of middle class and working class. I got them confused. But the middle class are, for the most part, they're business owners. Okay. The working class, for the most part, they're people who work for them. That's kind of a way to think of it. Right. So what did the people in the middle class own? Well, they owned the factories, mines, and railroads. What is another term for this middle class? So we're going to take a look at that. Those who benefited most from, sorry, I just want to make sure those who benefited most from the Industrial Revolution were the entrepreneurs who set it in motion. So there's one word we could use. But it's actually an old word that we learned. The Industrial Revolution created this new middle class, or bourgeoisie, whose members came from a variety of backgrounds. Some were merchants who invested their growing profits in factories. Others were inventors or skilled artisans who developed new technologies. Some rose from rags to riches, a pattern that this age greatly admired. Now, that is this age. In the previous age, we remember from the French Revolution, there was tension between the nobility, the old wealthy families, and the bourgeoisie, which were these rags to riches folks. The old money versus new money is kind of what this is often called. So our question, if we go back to it, what's another term for this middle class? Well, this term is bourgeoisie. And this is related to the bourgeoisie we talked about during the French Revolution. Although here we see this is a growing number of people in the bourgeoisie, and there are more factories now than there were during the French Revolution. Remember, the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, they had some overlap. But for the most part, during the French Revolution, we're talking about merchants and small businesses, where in the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about growing factories that get bigger and bigger. So the bourgeoisie accumulate even more wealth. Next question is, what were the homes of the middle class like? So let's take a look. Middle-class families lived in well-furnished, spacious homes on paved streets and had a ready supply of water. They wore fancy clothing and ate well. The new middle class took pride in their hard work and their determination to get ahead. Only a few had sympathy for the poor. Women of the middle class did not leave their home to work. Instead, focused their energy on raising their children. This contrasted with the wealthy, who had maidservants to look after their children, and the working class, whose children were at work. Okay. So middle-class families lived in well-furnished, spacious homes, paved streets with ready supply of water. They were nice houses, nice homes. At home and raised children. This is kind of, you could argue this is kind of the birthplace of the idea that women should work in the home. Women should be at home. This is kind of a, I guess, sort of a common idea, especially in the early part of the 20th century. This is an idea that we've always seemed to have gone back to. So Nice homes, women stayed at home and raised children. Okay. Oh, I guess that answers the next question. Stayed home and raised children. All right, I'm going to be clearing this in just a second and moving on. If you do find that I'm going a little fast, keep in mind this will be posted as a video at about 11 o'clock today, so it'll be on video. So now we're going to move on to the industrial working class. What are the homes like for the industrial working class, and what are tenements? The industrial working class. While the wealthy and the middle class lived in pleasant neighborhoods, vast numbers of poor struggled to survive in foul-smelling slums. They packed into tiny rooms in tenements or multi-story buildings divided into apartments. These tenements had no running water, only community pumps. Okay, so they didn't have sinks or bathtubs in their apartments. We're talking about just rooms. Electricity was still kind of a new thing, or it hadn't been invented yet early on. And so we're talking about just literally just rooms that were packed together in great big buildings. And if you wanted a drink of water or you wanted a bath, you still had to go outside and pump water from underground. And it was not a lot of fun. There was no sewage or sanitation system, so waste and garbage just rotted in the street. Sewage was also dumped into rivers, which created an overwhelming stench, and it contaminated the drinking water. This led to a spread of disease like cholera. So that same pump that pumps water up out of the ground, well, guess what's seeping down into the ground? It's the sewage from all the people just throwing their chamber pot out the window in the morning. It was not a city like we think of today. It was like a city if there were no trash trucks, there was no sewer systems, and there was no electricity. It was bad. So what were their homes like? I think it's fair to say that they were cramped, right? They were cramped. There was no sewage or sanitation and no water system. Actually, let's look. What? Small. No water or sewage system. Garbage and sewage in the street. Oh shoot. And we can say that they were diseased because sewage often contaminated the drinking water and people caught disease. We'll just say disease spread. What are tenements? We didn't really answer that question. They're multi-story buildings divided into apartments. Okay. It's enough to say that they're just small apartments. Tenements are small apartments. The next question says, it asks, who were the Luddites and why did they smash machinery? Who were the Luddites and why did they smash machinery? Workers staged futile protests. Although labor unions or workers' organizations were illegal at the time, secret unions did exist among frustrated British workers. They wanted to initiate worker reforms like increases in pay, but they had no political power to effect change. Sometimes their frustration led to violence. The first instances of industrial riots occurred in England from 1811 to 1813. Groups of textile workers, known as the Luddites, resisted the labor-saving machines that were costing them their jobs. Some of them smashed textile machines with sledgehammers and burned factories. They usually wore masks and operated at night. There was widespread support among the working class for these Luddite groups. The text, I believe, goes on to talk about the Luddites. So who were the Luddites? The Luddites were frustrated industrial workers. They smashed machines that had taken jobs. Okay, so how does a machine take your job? Well, let's try to imagine that. So if your job is to very carefully by hand, let's say spin thread. Okay, you use a foot pedal and it turns a spinning wheel, and you spin that fiber into thread. Okay, and you and your sister and your mom and your grandma and your aunts and all the women you know, they have always spun thread. It's been a tradition in your family for generations. And suddenly, the wealthy guy up the street who keeps buying businesses, he decides to buy a spinning jenny. And he puts it in a shed down the road, and he hires your one sister who you really don't like that well. He hires her to run that machine, and she makes all of the thread way faster than you and everyone else you know can. Suddenly, they don't need your thread. They're buying thread cheaply from your sister. Well, these Luddites, they were tired of that. They were tired of their jobs going away. They were tired of their worth being decreased by these machines. And so in some cases, they set fire to them. They would just burn the factory down, okay, where they would break the machine with sledgehammers. Okay. All right, so that's the Luddites. The next question asks, what did people do at Sunday school? It's kind of interesting. It says workers find comfort in religion. Many working class people found comfort in a religious movement called Methodism. This is still popular around here in Ohio, by the way. This movement was influenced by the Industrial Revolution as people moved to cities and lost connections with their old churches. John Wesley had founded the Methodist movement in the mid-1700s. He stressed the need for a personal sense of faith. He encouraged his followers to improve themselves by adopting sober, moral ways. Methodist meetings featured hymns and sermons promising forgiveness of sin and a better life to come. Methodist preachers took this message of salvation into the slums. There, they tried to rekindle hope among the working poor. They set up Sunday schools where followers not only studied the Bible, but also learned to read and write. Methodists helped to channel workers' anger away from revolution and toward reform. So what do people do in Sunday school? Well, they study the Bible, but they also learn to read and write. So it wasn't just about religion the whole time in these Sunday schools. A lot of it was about giving people an outlet and teaching people to how to better themselves. Okay. All right. What was a working day like during the Industrial Revolution? Well, I'm sure we can start to imagine this, but let's take a look at the reading. life in the factories and mines. The heart of the new industrial city was the factory. There, the technology of the machine age and the rapid pace of industrialization imposed a harsh new way of life on workers. Working in a factory was different from working on a farm. In rural villages, people had worked hard, but their work varied according to the season. Life was also hard for poor rural workers who were part of the putting out system, but at least they worked at their own pace. In the grim factories of industrial towns, workers faced a rigid schedule set by the factory whistle. So what was a working day like? Working hours were long, with shifts lasting from 12 to 16 hours, 6 or 7 days a week. Workers could only take breaks when the factory owners gave permission. Exhausted workers suffered accidents from machines that had no safety devices. They might lose a finger, a limb, or even their lives. In textile mills, workers constantly breathed in air that was filled with lint. This damaged their lungs. Workers who became sick or injured, they just lost their jobs. The majority of factory owners were women rather than men. Employers preferred to hire women because they thought women could adapt more easily to the machines and thought they were easier to manage. In addition, employers generally paid women half of what they paid men. Okay, so it's interesting. This comes from a time in history when, at least in Britain at the time, the relationship between society and women was a little different than what we know now. Women's role in society was considered to be that of servitude or sort of doing what they're told. And so factory owners knew this and they sort of took advantage of this. They basically thought women were easier to boss around because at the time they were. Okay? But factory work created a double burden for women. Their new jobs took them out of their homes for most of the day. When they returned to their cramped tenements, okay, they had to feed and clothe their families, clean and cope with problems like sickness and injury. So they had to work hard in the factory all day, and then they had to come home and take care of kids who had gotten hurt in the factory next door. All of this without running water or plumbing or anything like that. I don't know about you guys, but this doesn't sound too strange. This sounds sort of familiar to me. In my own upbringing, well after the Industrial Revolution, my own mom worked all day and then she came home and tried to take care of her family. So it begins, that trend, it begins in the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So what was a working day like? They were long, they were dangerous, they were difficult. We could say they were 12 hours or more, dangerous, difficult. Why were the majority of early factory workers women? At the time, well, let's just say women were easier to manage. I'm not saying they should be easier to manage. I'm saying that at the time, it's just a fact that they were. And they got paid half. They got paid half of what a man would be paid. Thank goodness we live in a modern age where women are paid exactly like men are. Right, Mr. Wayne?
Yeah. That's how it works.
Yeah. That's sort of a joke. It's pretty well known, although some people reject the idea. It's pretty well known that in America today, in the year 2020, many years after this, women still struggle to be paid like their male co-workers are paid. Generally, it sort of varies by industry, but For the most part, women don't make as much as men, and people like me think that's wrong. So, okay. The next question is, why did children have to work during the Industrial Revolution? Oh, I guess it helps when I'm not muted. Children have dangerous jobs. Factories and mines also hired many boys and girls. These children often started working at age 7 or 8, sometimes as young as 5. Nimble-fingered and quick-moving, they changed spools in the hot and humid textile mills, where sometimes they couldn't see because of all the dust. They also crawled under machinery to repair broken threads in the mills. Conditions were even worse for children who worked in the mines. Some sat all day opening and closing air vents. Others hauled coal carts in the extreme heat. It's hot down in a mine. It has to do with pressure and stuff, but way down in a coal mine, it gets very, very hot. Because children had helped with work on the farm, parents were able to accept the idea of child labor. Okay, so people were used to their children helping them pick strawberries or whatever. So it wasn't strange for them to send their kids to work, but it was different work. It was more dangerous and it was harder. Okay. But the wages children earned were needed just to keep their families from starving. So the question was, why did children?
I mean, if the option for me was between working or dying, I think I'd pick working, even if it's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, but the reason they had to work was that their wages were needed. So the early part of the Industrial Revolution is a time when lots of people worked very, very hard for very little money. Okay, that's the lesson to be taken from this chunk of the reading. All right, lots of people worked very hard for very little. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to the results of industrialization. I think that's the last little chunk in this reading, so I'm going to clear this. The question is, what were some of the positive effects of the Industrial Revolution? So we're gonna look at the other part of the Industrial Revolution. We're not just talking about how it was awful for workers, right? Since the 1800s, and this is right after the Industrial Revolution or towards the end of it. Since then, people have debated whether the Industrial Revolution was a blessing or a curse. The early industrial age certainly brought terrible hardships. Over time, though, reformers pressed for laws to improve working conditions. Labor unions won the right to bargain with employers for better wages. Labor unions won the right to bargain for better wages, better hours, and working conditions. Eventually, working class men gained the right to vote, which gave them some political power. Despite the social problems that were created by the Industrial Revolution, like low pay, awful living conditions, the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Age, I should say, did have some positive effects. As demand for mass-produced goods grew, new factories opened, which created more jobs. With more jobs, wages rose, so much that workers had enough left over after paying rent, buying food, that they could buy a newspaper or visit a music hall. As the cost of railroad travel fell, people could visit family in other towns. Horizons widened and opportunities increased. So what were some good things? Well, I'd say it sort of comes around this as new factories opened and more jobs, wages rose, right? And that's the truth. Even in parts of the world where industrialization is just now happening, we see that life is hard early in the change when people start to work in factories. But over time, it's kind of nice for people to be able to earn a wage. Okay. So as you get more and more factories, the wages rise, and people begin, I should say workers, they begin to have some extra money. None of this is meant to ignore all of the changes that the labor unions brought in with safer working conditions and things like that. But really, it all kind of fits with this, right? As more progress comes in, things get better. So, in your words, was the Industrial Revolution a blessing or a curse? Okay. There are different ways you can approach this question, but whatever your answer was, I'd like you to talk intelligently about this. I'd like you guys to say, based on the stuff you read before, was it good or bad? And you guys can go ahead and tell me in the chat what you think of that. But we should use support from earlier in our reading, from our earlier questions up here, okay? All right. That is it for the social impacts of the Industrial Revolution.